Now, here's something rather fascinating that most of us never quite grasp. We spend our entire lives being absolutely furious with ourselves for not knowing things we couldn't possibly have known. Isn't that curious? It's like being angry at a flower for not blooming in winter, or scolding the ocean for being wet. You see, there's this peculiar game we play with time. We stand here in the present moment, armed with all our accumulated wisdom, our hard-won insights, our battle scars that have finally taught us something, and we look back at our former selves with the most extraordinary indignation. How could I have been so foolish? We cry. How could I have said such things, done such things, been so utterly blind? But wait just a moment. Let's examine this curious phenomenon more closely, shall we? That person you're so angry with, that bumbling, confused, sometimes cruel version of yourself from years ago, did they have access to a crystal ball? Did they possess some magical ability to see into the future and understand the consequences of their actions? Did they have the benefit of all the experiences that have shaped you since then? Of course not. They were working with the tools they had, the consciousness they possessed, the understanding they'd managed to scrape together by that point in their journey. To condemn them for not knowing what you know now is rather like scolding a caterpillar for not being a butterfly, isn't it? And yet, this is precisely what we do. We carry around this tremendous burden of self-judgment, this crushing weight of should-haves and could-haves, as if somehow we were meant to be born fully wise, completely aware, never making a single misstep in our dance through existence. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really interesting. Every single stumble, every awkward fumble, every painful mistake was absolutely necessary. Not in some cosmic, predetermined sense, but in the very practical sense that it's precisely those experiences that brought you to where you are now. The wisdom you possess today grew directly out of the foolishness you regret from yesterday. You learned to walk by falling down, didn't you? No one taught you by giving you a lecture on the biomechanics of bipedal locomotion. You simply fell again and again until gradually, almost mysteriously, you found your balance. And isn't it rather wonderful that no one expected you to feel ashamed about all that falling? Everyone understood it was simply part of the process. Well, my dear friend, life is exactly the same way. We're all learning to walk in dimensions of existence that are infinitely more complex than physical space. We're learning to navigate the treacherous territories of relationship, of work, of meaning, of love. And yes, we're going to fall down, repeatedly, sometimes spectacularly. But here's what's truly extraordinary. Most of us learn to walk physically without ever developing a complex about our early falls. Yet we carry emotional and psychological falls with us for decades. We drag them along like a ball and chain, replaying them in our minds, editing and re-editing the script, punishing ourselves for not having been perfect performers in a play whose lines we'd never seen before. This is where the art of self-forgiveness begins to reveal its profound necessity. Not as some sentimental nicety, not as a way of letting ourselves off the hook, but as a recognition of something fundamental about the nature of learning itself. You see, forgiveness, real forgiveness, begins with a kind of cosmic humor about the whole situation. When you really look at it clearly, the idea that you should have known better is almost laughably absurd. It's like expecting a jazz musician to play a perfect improvisation without ever having hit a wrong note, or expecting a painter to create a masterpiece without ever making a brushstroke they later wish they could change. The trouble is, we've got this backwards notion that mistakes are somehow outside the natural order of things, that they represent some kind of cosmic error rather than an absolutely essential part of the learning process. But what if, and stay with me here, what if your mistakes aren't mistakes at all, but rather perfect expressions of exactly where your consciousness was at that moment? Think about it this way. If you met someone today who was struggling with exactly the same issues you were struggling with 10 years ago, would you condemn them? Would you be angry at their confusion, their blindness, their fumbling attempts to figure things out? Of course not. You'd probably feel tremendous compassion for them, wouldn't you? You'd understand that they're simply at a different point in their journey. Well, your past self was that person. They were doing their absolute best with the level of consciousness they had access to at the time. To expect them to have performed better is to expect something that was literally impossible. And here's where it gets even more interesting. When you truly understand this, when you really get it in your bones, something quite remarkable happens. The heavy sack of self-condemnation that you've been dragging around simply falls away. Not through effort, not through trying to forgive yourself, but through seeing clearly what was always true. There was never anything to forgive in the first place. There was only life expressing itself through you at various stages of development, sometimes gracefully, sometimes clumsily, but always authentically according to your level of understanding at the time. Now, let's turn our attention to an even more fascinating puzzle: other people. You know, we have this most peculiar habit of expecting other human beings to be operating from the same level of consciousness that we are, or that we think we are, or that we imagine they should be. And when they don't meet these expectations, when they act in ways that seem cruel or stupid or blind, we get terrifically upset with them. But here's the thing: when someone acts in a way that causes harm, they're not choosing from a menu of infinite possibilities with perfect clarity about the consequences. They're not sitting there thinking, let me see, I could respond with wisdom and compassion, or I could be bitter and cruel. I think I'll choose bitter and cruel just for the fun of it. No, they're responding from their current level of consciousness, which has been shaped by their entire history, their upbringing, their wounds, their fears, their confusions, their limited understanding of how life works. If someone is bitter, it's because bitterness has taken root in them. If someone is cruel, it's because they're in pain. If someone is selfish, it's because they haven't yet discovered the profound interconnectedness of all existence. They're not choosing to be this way in some ultimate sense. They're simply expressing what they are at this moment, just as a tree expresses its treeness, or a river expresses its riverness. You wouldn't get angry at a river for flowing downhill, would you? Now, this doesn't mean we become doormats. This doesn't mean we don't protect ourselves or set boundaries or walk away from harmful situations. Understanding why someone acts as they do doesn't require us to stick around and absorb their unconsciousness. But it does mean we can stop carrying around all this heavy resentment, all this burning indignation at the fact that unconscious people act unconsciously. Of course they do. What else would you expect? You see, when you're truly awake, when you're really paying attention, you begin to notice something quite remarkable. Hurt people. It's not a moral failing. It's more like a law of nature. Pain that isn't understood and integrated tends to be passed along, like a virus jumping from host to host. The person who was harshly criticized as a child often becomes harshly critical. The person who was abandoned learns to abandon others before they can be abandoned again. The person who was never truly seen or heard often becomes incapable of seeing or hearing others. It's not personal, even when it feels intensely personal. It's just pain reproducing itself, unconsciousness expressing unconsciousness, blindness bumping into blindness in the dark. And here's where the real intelligence comes in, not the intelligence of calculation or analysis, but the intelligence of the heart. This is the kind of intelligence that can look at someone who's causing harm and see not an enemy to be defeated, but a fellow human being who's struggling with forces they don't understand. This requires something quite extraordinary of us. It requires that we develop what I call imaginative empathy, the ability to slip into another person's inner world and taste their experience from within. Not to excuse their behavior, but to understand the pain and confusion that drives it. Most people think intelligence means being clever, being able to argue your point, being right. But the highest form of intelligence is actually this: the ability to see yourself in another person and another person in yourself. To recognize that their anger is your anger wearing a different costume. Their confusion is the same confusion you once carried, perhaps still carry in certain areas of your life. When you develop this kind of vision, something extraordinary happens. You can no longer hate anyone completely. You might dislike their behavior, you might choose not to spend time with them, you might need to protect yourself from them, but you can't hate them because you recognize them as yourself in a different form. It's like being angry at your reflection in a funhouse mirror. You might not like the distortion, but you can't really hate it because you recognize that it's still fundamentally you looking back. Now, let me share something with you that might sound a bit radical. At the deepest level, forgiveness isn't really about morality at all. It's about accuracy. It's about seeing things as they actually are, rather than as we imagine them to be. When we're trapped in resentment, when we're carrying around grudges and grievances, we're essentially arguing with reality. We're insisting that the past should have been different than it was. But the past is finished. It's done. It exists now only as patterns in your memory, stories you tell yourself about what happened. To keep rehashing these stories, to keep feeling victimized by events that are no longer occurring, is like trying to change a movie by shouting at the screen. The movie was filmed long ago. The actors have gone home. The set has been struck. All that remains is the recording. And you're sitting there in the theater, getting more and more agitated about something that's already over. Forgiveness, then, is not so much about letting someone off the hook as it is about getting yourself off the hook. It's about recognizing that carrying resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's about understanding that the chain of resentment binds you far more tightly than it binds anyone else. But here's the beautiful paradox. The moment you stop demanding that someone else change, the moment you stop insisting that they see the error of their ways and apologize and make amends, something shifts. Not necessarily in them, though that sometimes happens, but definitely in you. You're no longer emotionally dependent on their recognition, their apology, their transformation. You're free to respond to the situation as it actually is, rather than as you wish it were. And sometimes, mysteriously, when you stop pushing against someone, they stop pushing back. Not always, mind you. Some people are so trapped in their patterns that they'll keep repeating them regardless of how you respond. But even then, you're free. You're no longer dancing to their tune, no longer reactive to their unconsciousness. There's a profound difference between this kind of understanding and mere tolerance or suppression. Tolerance still carries the energy of resistance. It's still saying, I don't like this, but I'll put up with it. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, goes much deeper. It's more like the way the sky relates to clouds. It doesn't resist them, doesn't fight them, doesn't try to push them away. It simply provides the space in which they can arise and pass away. This is what true spiritual maturity looks like. Not the ability to control life, but the ability to flow with it. Not the power to make everything go your way, but the wisdom to find peace regardless of which way things go. And you know what's really fascinating? When you reach this level of understanding, when you truly get that, everyone is doing the best they can from their current level of consciousness, you begin to see the cosmic comedy of it all. Here we are, billions of human beings, stumbling around on this tiny planet, each convinced that our particular way of stumbling is the right way. Each certain that if only everyone else would stumble the way we stumble, everything would be fine. It's simultaneously tragic and hilarious, profound and absurd. The person who cuts you off in traffic isn't trying to ruin your day. They're probably running late and stressed and not even thinking about you. The relative who always says the wrong thing at family gatherings isn't plotting to make you miserable. They're likely just as uncomfortable as you are, and desperately trying to connect in the only way they know how. Even the people who seem genuinely malicious, who appear to take pleasure in causing harm, if you look deeply enough, you'll usually find tremendous pain at the core of their being. Not pain that excuses their behavior, but pain that explains it. This doesn't mean we become naive or passive in the face of cruelty. Understanding why someone acts as they do doesn't require us to enable their destructive behavior. Sometimes the most compassionate response is a firm no. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to play their game. But when you understand the pain behind the behavior, you can set these boundaries without hatred, without the burning desire for revenge, without the need to punish or teach them a lesson. You can protect yourself and others without carrying poison in your heart. And here's perhaps the most beautiful thing about this understanding. It naturally extends to yourself. When you really see that everyone is struggling, that everyone is doing their best from their current level of awareness, it becomes impossible to maintain the fiction that you alone should have been perfect. You begin to see your own journey with the same compassionate eyes you've learned to turn on others. Your mistakes become not sources of shame, but evidence of your humanity. Your struggles become not signs of failure, but proof that you're growing. The person you were yesterday, the person you were 10 years ago, the person you were in that moment when you said or did something you now regret that person was perfect exactly as they were. Not perfect in the sense of flawless, but perfect in the sense of being exactly what this process of awakening looks like at that particular stage. You see, we have this strange idea that spiritual growth should be a smooth, linear progression from unconsciousness to enlightenment, like climbing a ladder or ascending a mountain. But it's not like that at all. It's more like a spiral dance, sometimes moving forward, sometimes seeming to go backward, sometimes spinning in circles, but always moving toward greater understanding. And the beautiful thing is that every step of this dance is necessary. The falls are as important as the leaps. The confusion is as valuable as the clarity. The darkness is as essential as the light. When you really understand this, forgiveness stops being something you have to work at and becomes something that happens naturally, like water flowing downhill. You don't forgive people because it's the noble thing to do or because some authority told you to. You forgive because you understand that there's nothing to forgive. There's only life expressing itself in all its messy, beautiful, complicated glory. This understanding doesn't make you passive or weak. If anything, it makes you more effective in the world, because you're no longer wasting energy fighting battles that can't be won, carrying grudges that serve no purpose, demanding that reality be different than it is. You become like water, which is simultaneously the softest and most powerful force on earth. Water doesn't fight the rock. It simply flows around it, over it, through it, and eventually wears it down to sand, not through aggression, but through persistent, patient presence. And so we come to the heart of the matter. Forgiveness is not really about other people at all. It's about you. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of resentment, the chains of victimhood, the exhausting burden of carrying the past into the present moment. When you forgive, truly forgive, you don't change the past. The events that happened still happened. But you change your relationship to those events. You stop letting them define you, control you, limit you. You step out of the story of being the wounded one, the wronged one, the one who was treated unfairly, and into the much larger story of being a human being, learning to be human, making mistakes and growing from them, falling down and getting back up, gradually awakening to the profound interconnectedness of all existence. And in this larger story, there are no villains, only fellow travelers at different stages of the journey. There are no mistakes, only lessons. There is no past to regret, only experience to integrate. This is the deepest secret of forgiveness. It's not about them, it's about you. It's not about the past, it's about the present. It's not about making wrong things right. It's about stepping into the freedom that was always already there, waiting for you to claim it. So forgive yourself. Forgive the world. Not because it's noble or virtuous or because someone told you to, but because it's the most natural response once you see clearly what's actually happening here. We're all just walking each other home, stumbling through this mystery together, each doing the best we can with the understanding we have. And that, my friend, is not only enough, it's absolutely perfect. The dance goes on, and you're invited to join it fully, completely, without reservation. Not as someone who has transcended the human condition, but as someone who has embraced it so completely that they're free